Hey, this is going to be an uncut run of me getting the Spaceship Cockpit scrap in the Trailmakers Stranded in Space campaign mode as fast as I can and as early as I can. And it's also going to be an exercise in how perfectly rational game design choices can still lead to absolutely ridiculous outcomes. I'll be providing commentary over top the run in post. This is not live commentary. I'm not that good at the game. Can't walk and chew gum at the same time, but yeah, enjoy. One thing in Trailmakers, I'm sure everyone has experienced at some point, is you get out of your vehicle and you're kind of under it. It's surprisingly easy to get out of that situation. And the reason for that is when you step up, you exert a lot of upwards force on the vehicle, which, usually moves it unless it's ridiculously heavy. So what I'm building here is a little contraption that uses the sloped piece on the starter cockpit to pinch the player between that bottom block there and the slope. And it results in a lot of upward motion. The 4x3 or 4x2 blocks induce a lot of drag. And for a glider, I mean, drag is just as useful as lift. So we're going to take advantage of that. So what I'm doing here is just kind of correcting the steering. It was actually right the first time, and then it's wrong when I correct it, so I actually have to go back through and correct it again once I put the tail on. And I will say that a majority of the rotational force on this glider probably comes from the cockpit, because these control surfaces, they don't contribute much. Yep, this is the part where I test it. Turns out everything's backwards, so I have to flip these. Then I test it again. Oh, the roll's backwards now, so I flip that too. Alright, now it's in working order. So now we transform back into this thing, turn it around, so we are going away from the giant rock in the middle. And we have a bit of an oopsie. And you'll see, when we get into this thing, it starts to flip over, and then we go screaming off into the sky. Yeah, this is that upwards force I was talking about. And it's very strong. If you put a magnet on the bottom of this thing, it can actually lift the massive scraps up on these islands. Now, obviously, we're doing this literally as soon as we start the game, so we don't have any magnets. And the retrieval of this scrap is pretty hilarious. It's very manual. We'll see why. Now, once we get a good distance above, I transform into the glider and just kind of start going down. The reason you want to go this high is, well, one, it's visually evident. This thing is a piece of garbage, and it should be, because it's built out of the starting items. Flop our way down here. Now, you might be wondering how I don't die the instant I hit the ground. The answer to that is, for some reason, this thing is really durable. And another thing you'll see me do right here is delete the craft, go into build and delete the craft instead of exiting the cockpit. The reason you want to do that is your player velocity as you're doing that ascension glitch gets stored up. And if you leave the cockpit, normally, you get launched into the sky and die, which isn't very useful for getting the scrap because then you just respawn on the ground. Now what we're going to do here is just touch this orb so it starts rolling and then run back down this hill as fast as we can. Because we've got to catch up to this thing before it can get into a spot where it will become permanently stuck. I've tried. As far as I'm aware, there's absolutely no way to get this thing unstuck from this little spot. We'll see it in a minute when we run past it. But what we're going to do now is, with any other situation in Trailmakers, just use your head. In a quite literal sense. For some reason, the character is not able to be moved by scrap. Or rather, they're treated as much heavier than a lot of other game objects, which does make sense, again, for not getting stuck under vehicles. But what we can do is just kind of direct this enormous piece of scrap off this cliff, and we have our handy little arrow pointing us right back to the launch pad, which, as we can see by how much it's turning when I move, we're very close. This piece of scrap just so happens to be directly above the center of the map. Here, I attempted to spawn the plane and instantly died. I thought it was going to be a time loss, but you know what? It spawned me on the ground, so whatever. Now, to avoid a Mach 10 death, I get out into build mode and delete it to avoid a launch. And now we just kinda... we go push it in. That's what a lot of this is just pushing a giant ball around. Now, the unfortunate part of the location of this ball is it's always within the cutscene trigger for the launch pad. It's unavoidable, so we have to watch this.
Dear colleague, if you are hearing this, your cargo vessel has crashed and you have survived. The corporation will dispatch a rescue ship, but require you to leave the atmosphere of your current planet. Fortunately, your cargo can be repurposed as building blocks. Build a functional spacecraft by salvaging the scattered contents of your cargo. Once you have located a piece of cargo, place it underneath a recovery drone to extract the building block it contains. Please note that not all building blocks will be suitable for the spacecraft, but they can be used for local transportation purposes. Good luck.
Alright, cutscene over. Regain control. And now we just kind of start rolling this thing. Thank goodness absolutely none of this terrain is on an incline of even 1 degree. It's so flat. It takes a hot minute to roll this thing over there, too. There is a faster but much less consistent way where you just kind of build an enormous heap of 4x2 blocks and go into build mode and just kind of gizmo it halfway into the scrap. And it'll usually launch it really fast in the opposite direction, or I guess in the same direction that you put the blocks inside the scrap. The reason I don't do that is because 50% of the time it sends the scrap all the way out of the map bounds, and the other 50% of the time the scrap just straight up kills you. So it's very luck dependent. Totally normal thing that we've done here. You know, got in the spaceship cockpit before even the tutorial is over, I'd say. Very first item, very useful item. It can go underwater, so it's a nice early alternative to the diving bell. And there we go. 8 minutes and 40 seconds. Now, there's no timer on screen, right? This isn't a formal speedrun by me. I'm not putting this on any boards. I'm just kind of putting this out there. Thought it was pretty interesting that you can do this. Yeah, that's kind of it. See ya.